I've always been a voracious reader ever since I was a little kid, but there are precious few books that I can say left such a lasting impact on me that I still remember vivid plot details more than a decade later. Moments that will sometimes creep into the forefront of my consciousness and make me chuckle. Books that I can say that despite being written for children can still be enjoyed by adults, assuming that they're not embarrassed to be seen reading them. Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair, and welcome, my friends, to the Fudgetrospective. Few book series can say that they transcended childhoods quite like the Fudge series, written by Judy Blume, an author who is known for many popular children and young adult novels. Today's subject, Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, came out in 1972, and the final book in the series, Double Fudge, didn't come out until 2002, a full 3 decades later, with the 2 books in the middle, Super Fudge and Fudgemania, being released at 10-year intervals in between. What fascinates me so much about that fact is that it means that there are parents out there who could have conceivably grown up reading the first 2 or the first 3 books, that could have exposed their children to the series before the final novel was released and gotten to experience it together. In fact, Judy Blume herself notes that in the foreword for the 40th anniversary edition of this book. It's one of the first book series that I remember being really invested in, and I remember rereading these books over and over as a kid. So much so that when I sat down to reread this one, I realized that I remembered most of the book a lot more vividly than I thought I did. When I sat down and tried to think about what type of theme month I could do to follow Classic Novel Month, I racked my brain for months, coming up with a bunch of different ideas. Initially, I decided that I wanted to do a retrospective where I looked at an entire series, because I haven't done anything like that since the Red Dwarf books back in 2012. Initially, the first idea I came up with was Animorphs, but there are 54 of those books, and they haven't been collected anywhere, so I'd have to track down 54 individual books. So maybe next year, or the year after. So I went back to the drawing board, and the book series that came to my mind next was Fudge. And so many wonderful memories came back to me, and, well, I wanted to share those memories with you guys. But before we get to that, since this is a retrospective, I've sort of got to talk about the inception of the Fudge series. The first book was originally conceived as a picture book, an adaptation of a newspaper article that someone gave to Judy Blume, of a toddler that swallowed a turtle, with the idea that it might inspire Blume, which it did. She submitted a manuscript, but it was rejected, with her getting reasons why, because one of the publishers felt that it might inspire children to swallow turtles, and another found it to be such an unbelievable story. A few years later, it was submitted to another publisher whose editor really liked it, but thought it had potential to be a chapter book, and so Blume took the advice and submitted a manuscript, and Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing was born, introducing the world to Peter, Fudge, and Dribble the Turtle, and all the colorful people that inhabit their world. But before we get on with the review, I just want to explain how the month is going to work. As a retrospective, I'm going to be tackling the entire series as a whole. It's only being split into 4 videos because the books, while not exceptionally long, have full stories, so I can't really combine them together and do the first 2 books and the last 2 books together. What I'm saying is that these are going to be slightly different than usual. I'm going to hold all judgment of characters until the end, looking at their development over the course of the entire series. I'll still give my thoughts on each individual book during the weeks, but I'll be doing a more traditional riff-styled summary of each book, going over basically the entire plot and making jokes along the way, because the intention is to go over the entire series over the course of the month. Anyway, without further ado, let's get the Fudgetrospective on the road. This is Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. like always, I'll be looking at the covers for the books that I owned as a kid, and not the ones that I have now. Partly because I have more of a connection with the ones I grew up with, and partly because these canoe covers are kinda boring. This cover is great though, simple but great. We've got Peter here in the foreground looking at the reader with a face that is very recognizable for anyone with younger siblings. Just a look of sheer exasperation. In the background, we've got a bunch of discarded Juicio boxes along with Fudge, who is running around carrying a turtle in a bowl. Finally, up top, we've got the author's name and the title. A very simple cover, but a brilliant cover. Those new ones are a little too minimalist for my liking. This one uses the negative space well, and puts more of a focus on Peter and Fudge than it does on Judy Blume's name, unlike the one that I purchased for this review. Anyway, let's get to the book itself. The book opens with Peter Hatcher, a 9-year-old boy, winning a turtle at his friend Jimmy Fargo's birthday party, and bringing it home. His mother isn't thrilled, not liking the smell, but one person is particularly enthralled with the turtle that Peter named Dribble. His 2-year-old brother Fardley, but no one calls him that. Everyone calls him Fudge. Fudge is, well, he's a toddler, and like a toddler, he is both extremely opinionated about what he wants, and extremely obstinate in regards to doing what other people want. Their mother is a firm parent, but because Fudge is the baby, she tends to enable a lot of his bad behavior. This naturally drives Peter up the wall, since Fudge has a habit of going into his room and messing around with his stuff. Anyone with siblings can attest to how annoying that is. The book consists of vignettes of the life of the Hatchers and Peter's attempts to endure all the crazy situations his brother gets into without killing Fudge, another thing that siblings can relate to. We start off with the boy's father, Warren, who works for an advertising company, trying to win an advertising contract, and so he has the president of Juicio and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Yarby, stay in their apartment when they visit New York instead of staying in a hotel because... Honestly, I have no idea, and considering that he has 2 young kids, and one of them is Fudge, this is honestly the dumbest idea he could have ever had. Unless his plan is to blow the entire deal for whatever reason, then it would be the absolute smartest. Before they arrive, Fudge eats 2 flowers, which throws their mother Anne into a tizzy because she's one of those neurotic moms who panic over everything, and she calls the family doctor, and he tells her that Fudge is probably fine. Warren arrives with the Yarbys, and they come bearing gifts for the kids, a toy train for Fudge, and a picture dictionary for Peter, who not only is too old for the gift, but also has the exact same dictionary from when he was Fudge's age, but he's polite about it and graciously accepts it. Fudge, recognizing the book, runs into Peter's room and brings out the old one, embarrassing both the Yarbys and the Hatchers. Then during dinner, Fudge brings out Dribble's bowl and shows the turtle to Mrs. Yarby, who is naturally aghast. Then Fudge comes out wearing a gorilla mask. What I'm getting at here is that Warren made a huge mistake with his plan. Obviously, the night doesn't go well, and the next week, Warren comes home from the office and throws out all the Juicio they have in the house because his company lost the contract. Then Fudge goes through an animal phase, at first wanting to be a dog and refusing to sit at the table, and tries everything that she can to get him to eat food, making special food for him, letting him have whatever he wants, but Fudge refuses, leading to Warren deciding that he'll either eat it or he'll wear it, of which Fudge chooses the latter, and Warren picks him up, carries him to the bathtub, and dumps a bowl of cereal on Fudge's head, which rectifies the problem. I see, the Dr. Cox method of parenting.
All right, Chimp. Just in case you get hungry later on.
At least Warren picked something easier to wash out than spaghetti sauce. The next phase occurs at the park, where there's an interesting bit of history in Peter's telling of the story. Since reading this as a kid, I didn't really understand why Peter's parents would worry about him getting mugged walking to the park, and how Jimmy Fargo, a 9-year-old, could get mugged repeatedly. This book was released in the 1970s. The New York that they live in is the Death Wish New York. Just goes to show you how much New York has changed that it took me this long to understand the reasoning. At the park is Peter, Fudge, and Jimmy Fargo, and Peter's neighbor and nemesis Sheila Tubman, who gets spun off into her own book that we won't be covering because it's not part of the main Fudge storyline. Anne has to rush home for a minute, and Sheila tells her that she'll keep an eye on Fudge for her. She's hesitant, but Sheila says that she has experience babysitting, and so she gives in, and Anne leaves. The three older kids take Fudge to the playground, and he goes to play on the jungle gym, as Sheila chases Peter and Jimmy around the playground with cooties. Fudge, in the meantime, has climbed to the top of the jungle gym and decided that he's a bird. He calls out to Peter just in time for Peter, Sheila, and Jimmy to see him plummet to the ground, knocking his two front teeth out. Sheila freaks out, and Jimmy goes to find Anne, returning with her, and she takes control of the situation, though she takes out her frustration on Peter by blaming him, even though he wasn't actually in charge, which she later apologizes for. Next up is Fudge's birthday party, where Anne enlists Peter's help to keep things under control. The party guests are Ralphie, not that one, an eater, Jenny, a biter, and Sam, a crier. Recipe for disaster if you ask me, and if you ask Peter. During cake, Sam is terrified of the dark, so they have to keep the lights on. Jenny bites Grandma's hand when she tries to help her with her food, and Ralph vomits after eating 2 slices of cake. Then, during presents, Ralph misunderstands how birthday parties work and tries to take Fudge's new toy, and Fudge gets mad when Sam's gift is the exact same picture dictionary that the Yarbies got for Peter. You know, at this rate, they'll be able to build a fort with all the copies they get as gifts. Thankfully, Ralph falls asleep after jumping on Fudge's bed and annoying their downstairs neighbor, but the others stay awake, and Anne forces Peter to show them Dribble. They ask some questions about him, and everything seems to be going okay until Jenny asks if Dribble makes. She's happy to say that she also makes, and demonstrates for everyone, reenacting that scene from The Exorcist where Reagan pees all over the carpet during the party. I'm not even joking, that's basically what happens. Once the party is over, Peter remarks to Anne that 3 years old is too young for a party, and for once, she agrees with him. Following that is a double feature of Fudge going to the dentist and Anne taking the boys shopping for new shoes, where Peter has to aid in tricking Fudge, since he wants to emulate his older brother in every way, and force him to open his mouth for the dentist and to pretend to pick out the shoes that Anne wants Fudge to wear, which Peter is glad to do, though he's not as glad about going out to eat after, where Fudge starts putting his food on himself because he's still quite taken with Warren's decree of eat it or wear it. The next chapter details Peter trying to work on a school project with Jimmy and Sheila, and the various problems they run into doing it, since group projects with your best friend and your nemesis always beget disagreement. Sheila wants to ensure that the teacher knows that the report was written in her handwriting, whereas Peter and Jimmy just worked on the poster board. This naturally causes dissension in the ranks, and Jimmy nearly rips up the report before Sheila agrees to take off the credit. However, a few days before it's due, Fudge gets into Peter's room where they're storing the poster board and ruins it, meaning that Peter and Jimmy have to scramble to remake it, which they manage to do, but it also does 2 things for Peter. Anne actually disciplines Fudge by spanking him, because he should know better. Not that spanking is right, but it was a standard of the time, and Fudge doesn't just get off with a warning and is actually punished, so I'm willing to overlook it. And Warren buys Peter a lock for his door to prevent similar incidents in the future, something that Peter had requested in the past but was rebuked. Obviously, he proved that it was a necessity. After that, Anne goes away for a week to see her sister, who recently had a baby, leaving Warren in charge. Warren, well, if you haven't noticed, he's not entirely present all the time. He works a lot, so he's got a lot to learn, especially with Fudge. The first lesson is learned when he takes the boys to work with him. Warren is busy working on a new commercial that they're holding auditions for, so his secretary Janet shows the boys around, going past the auditions where the showbiz moms are getting in arguments over which kid is next. The president of Toddlebike, Mr. Vincent, the company that's making the commercial, steps out of the room and spots the perfect child standing out there, pointing at him. Peter at first thinks they're talking about him, but Mr. Vincent saw Fudge and proclaims that he's perfect. They take him inside, where Warren tells Mr. Vincent that Fudge is his son and he's not an actor, but Mr. Vincent doesn't care. Not being an actor hasn't stopped Jared Leto. They get Fudge down on the bike and set up the commercial, but he refuses to cooperate, accepting Oreo bribes, but rebuking the production staff at every turn, which is just ridiculous. You can't do that when you're a newbie. You have to be a really big star to be able to do stuff like that. Peter is initially jealous because Fudge is going to be in a commercial and will get paid and be famous and all that, but Warren tells him that it won't change anything, and they ask Peter to pull another fast one, tricking Fudge into complying using reverse psychology, and as they film the commercial, Janet tells Peter that he saved the day. Anne is still gone for a while longer, so Warren decides to take the boys to see a movie, despite Peter's objections that Fudge is too young, and Fudge acts like a toddler in the movie theater, loud and obnoxious and throwing popcorn at everything. Then, while Peter and Warren get engrossed in the movie, Fudge wanders off, meaning that they have to call the projectionist and stop the movie to search, finding Fudge near the front because he was trying to pet the bears on the screen. See, and I thought he was trying to go to the front to join the guy and his two robot pals that were talking in the front row. When they get home, Warren decides to cook dinner, but because he's not usually the cook of the house, all he comes up with is a dreadful mushroom omelet, which both he and Peter hate, but Fudge loves. Go figure. When Anne gets home, they happen to catch the Toddle Bike commercial on TV, and when Fudge says that he's in it, Anne initially dismisses it as a kid that kinda looks like him, until Peter and Warren back up Fudge's claims, and Peter and Warren share a good laugh at all the stuff that happened during Anne's absence that they didn't tell her about. The final chapter details the most important day of Peter's young life. He returns home from school to find the lock on his door undone, and when he goes inside, Dribble is nowhere to be found. He goes to Anne to ask her if she knows, but she doesn't. Fudge knows something, though, telling Peter that Dribble is in his tummy. Peter is crushed, and Anne is in disbelief, but Fudge is adamant that he ate the turtle, having swallowed it whole. Anne freaks out and calls the doctor and an ambulance, and Fudge is taken to the hospital, with Peter tagging along. The doctor shows Peter the x-ray and shows him where Dribble is in Fudge's stomach, and tells him that Dribble will be out of Fudge's stomach shortly, after Fudge digests castor oil, milk of magnesia, and prune juice.
Warriors drink.
Peter goes home, walks by his grandmother, and finds himself missing Fudge's antics. He is worried about him, after all. That night, the call comes in that Fudge passed the turtle out of his stomach, to which Peter asks if Dribble was alive when they removed him, to which his grandmother replies in the negative. Fudge comes home and gets a bunch of presents, and Warren comes home with a surprise for Peter. Peter tells him that he doesn't want a new turtle, and Warren tells him that it's not a new turtle. It's a puppy that Peter gladly accepts and names Turtle, in remembrance of Dribble as the book ends. Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing is exactly how I remember it being when I was a kid, which is to say that it is an utterly brilliant book. It's written very well, and despite being steeped in 60s, 70s era references, it remains a timeless classic. There were neat things that I missed as a kid, namely the references to the crime-ridden New York City that hasn't existed since way before I was born. But it's still timeless, and even as an adult, still relatable. I was sitting there reading this and reading about all the little injustices that Peter has to deal with, and my reaction to them was, yeah, this is BS. It does help that the makeup of the Hatcher family is quite similar to how my own family was when I was growing up. 2 parents, a dad that worked a lot, a mom that was always around, grandma helping out occasionally, the oldest child, and the younger brother. The age gap between me and my brother isn't nearly as large as the one between Peter and Fudge, but there were still moments that I had in my life that mirrored the book. And I think that's why I connected so much to this book as a kid, and probably why I connected to the other books too. Overall, the book is fantastic, whether or not you're the intended audience. I highly recommend this book for not only giving to a kid that likes reading, but if you've never read it before and are an adult, don't be ashamed and give it a read. A book is a book, and I think that everyone should read this one at least once. Come back next week for the continuing adventures of the Hatcher family in Super Fudge. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you actually get notified of the video being uploaded, and check out my other videos while you wait. See you next time. Warren tells Mr. Vincent that Fudge isn't an actor, but he doesn't care. It didn't stop Jared Leto. They get Fudge down on the... Zing! It didn't stop Jared Leto. Didn't stop Jared Leto.